quiet marine biology teacher from Anaheim once drew a small comic book about tide pools to teach kids about the ocean. That little comic grew into one of the most successful cartoons in television history. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air for over 25 years, has aired over 300 episodes, and has grown into films, a Broadway musical, and a brand worth billions. The world inside it is built with more care than almost any cartoon made for children. A pineapple house, a restaurant shaped like a fishing trap, a Navy veteran with a daughter who is a whale, a tiny green copepod with a wife who is a computer. Under the bright surface, the show has carried something darker since the very first episode. A recipe born from a ruined friendship, a town named after a real nuclear test site, an origin, a writer says, rose out of the end of the world. Tonight, we walk slowly through all of it. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. The loop that made Squidward the inventor. By the final days of December in 1999, SpongeBob SquarePants had only been on the air for a few months. The show was still new enough that most people had not yet decided what it was. To a lot of adults, it looked like another loud, colorful cartoon made to sell cereal on Saturday mornings. The animation was bright, the voices were strange, the laugh of the main character carried across the room whether anyone wanted it to or not. Almost nobody at that point expected the show to be remembered for anything beyond a pineapple and a square pair of pants. And then, on the last day of the 20th century, the show quietly aired one of the oddest and most quietly sad 20 minutes of television a children's network had ever broadcast. That episode was called SB129, and it ends with a reveal that changes the way the entire world of Bikini Bottom is allowed to work. Squidward tentacles, in those early days, had a very simple shape. He lived alone in a house built to look like a stone head from Easter Island, sitting right between the two neighbors who tormented him most. He played the clarinet badly and believed with total confidence that he played it beautifully. He wanted to be an artist. He wanted to be left alone. More than anything, he wanted a single morning of peace without the sound of SpongeBob laughing through the wall. Season 1 used him mostly as the grump, the one who gets annoyed and then gets a little punished for it. The audience learned to expect that pattern. What SB129 does is take that simple, grouchy character and drop him into something far larger and far lonelier than the show had attempted before. The setup of the episode is small and ordinary, which is exactly why what follows lands so hard. The morning begins with Squidward opening his window to practice. SpongeBob's alarm clock, sitting on a sill and facing outward, swings open and knocks the clarinet straight into Squidward's mouth. From the house next door, SpongeBob calls over and asks whether Squidward wants to go jellyfishing. Squidward tries to refuse. The trouble is that his clarinet is wedged in his mouth, so the words that come out are a muffled noise, and SpongeBob happily decides that the noise was a yes. Once the clarinet is finally pulled free, the day has already turned against him. SpongeBob and Patrick stand outside, ready to go, asking again and again if he is prepared to leave. Squidward does what many people would do when cornered by something they cannot stand. He lies, and then he hides. He asks SpongeBob why he is not at work, hoping to send him away, and SpongeBob explains that it is Sunday, and the Krusty Krab is closed. There is a small, well-documented mistake here that fans noticed years later, because the day the episode aired in the real world was actually a Monday rather than a Sunday, and the narrator inside the episode calls it Sunday anyway. It is a tiny detail with no effect on the plot, but it is worth naming honestly, because it is the kind of small slip that shows even a carefully built episode was made by people working quickly. Squidward tells the two of them to wait exactly where they are. Then he slips out his own back door and runs to the one place he believes they will never follow him, the closed and empty Krusty Krab. His hiding place becomes his prison. Squidward steps into the restaurant's walk-in freezer to wait out the day, and the heavy door seals behind him. He cannot get it open. For a moment he stays calm and tells himself, out loud, that someone will notice he is missing and come looking, and that he will be out of there in no time. That small line is the hinge of the whole episode, because no one comes. The screen goes dark, and when light returns, 2,000 years have passed. What thaws him is not a person, it is a robot, a chrome descendant of SpongeBob called Spongetron, who pulls a frozen Squidward out of the ice in a future Bikini Bottom that has become cold, silver, and strange. The animation in this stretch is doing something the show rarely did in its first season. The future is rendered as a smooth, metallic, almost empty place, drained of the warm colors that defined every earlier episode. Squidward, who spent the whole morning desperate to be away from everyone, is now genuinely alone in time, surrounded by machines wearing the face of the neighbor he was running from. He panics. He begs Spongetron for any way back to his own era. The robot points him toward a time machine, and Squidward climbs in, certain that he can simply rewind to the morning he lost. He overshoots. Instead of arriving back at his front door, Squidward lands in a prehistoric Bikini Bottom, long before the town he knew existed. He believes at first that this is perfect. If he travels far enough into the past, he reasons, there will be no SpongeBob to bother him at all. The past has other plans. Waiting for him are two ancient ape-like creatures who are unmistakably early versions of SpongeBob and Patrick, drawn shaggy and dim and curious. They will not leave him alone. To buy himself a moment of quiet, Squidward shows them a way to pass the time. He teaches these two primitive creatures how to catch jellyfish. He hands the most childish, most SpongeBob-coded activity in the entire show to the ancestors of the very people he despises, simply to make them go away for 5 minutes. It backfires immediately, and it backfires through the one thing Squidward loves. He takes out his clarinet and begins to play, and the sound, which he believes is music, is so unpleasant to the prehistoric pair that they turn on him and chase him in a rage. Fleeing for the time machine, Squidward scrambles inside and, in his hurry, breaks a key part of the controls. The machine does not return him home. It drops him somewhere worse than the future and worse than the past. It drops him into a place that has nothing in it at all. The void sequence is the heart of the episode, and the reason Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, has called this the most surreal episode the show ever produced. Squidward stands in a flat, white, endless nowhere, a space with no walls, no floor he can see, no other living thing. For one short beat, he is delighted. This is the thing he claimed to want from the very first scene. Total silence, total solitude, nobody asking him to go jellyfishing. He stretches out his arms and savors it. And then the silence begins to answer him. A low voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere, starts to repeat a single word over and over. The word alone. He runs, and running takes him exactly nowhere, because there is nowhere to run to. He stomps the ground in frustration and breaks through it, falling into a small dark space where, by pure accident, the broken time machine is waiting. What happens next is the emotional turn that early SpongeBob almost never reached for. Squidward, surrounded by the perfect emptiness he always said he wanted, breaks down completely. He begs the machine to take him back. He says he misses Bikini Bottom. He says he misses his home and his Easter Island house. And then, with no irony and no joke to cushion it, he admits that he even misses SpongeBob. The show does not undercut this moment with a gag. It lets it sit. The character who spent the entire episode running from the people around him discovers that being truly, finally alone is not freedom at all. It is the worst thing that has ever happened to him. At those words, with no scientific explanation offered, the time machine simply works again. It carries Squidward back to Conch Street in the present, to the exact morning he fled, where SpongeBob and Patrick are still standing outside waiting for him. For a few seconds, he is overjoyed to see them, throwing his arms around the moment he had been trying to escape. The relief lasts until they ask the question one more time. They want to know if he is finally ready to go jellyfishing. And just like that, the old Squidward returns. The exhaustion of 2,000 years evaporates. The lesson seems to vanish, and he snaps. He demands to know who could possibly have invented such a ridiculous game in the first place. SpongeBob and Patrick answer together. The one who invented it was Squidward. That single answer is the plot twist, and it is built more cleverly than almost anything else in season 1. Jellyfishing only exists in Bikini Bottom because Squidward taught it to two prehistoric creatures to get rid of them. He only taught it to them because he traveled into the past. He only traveled into the past because he was running from a game that SpongeBob and Patrick already loved. And SpongeBob and Patrick only love that game because Squidward, long ago, invented it. The cause feeds the effect, and the effect feeds the cause, in a circle with no real beginning. Squidward spent the entire episode trying to escape jellyfishing, and the escape attempt itself is the reason jellyfishing was ever created. He did not just fail to get away from it, he is the source of it. The show even leans into the strangeness of this loop on purpose. SB-129 is the first episode episode in which the title card is read aloud rather than shown silently, a small formal choice that signals from the opening seconds that this episode is going to behave differently from the ones around it. The cold, synthesized music that plays while Spongetron thaws, Squidward returns in a rougher, more primitive form when Squidward invents jellyfishing in the past, quietly tying the future and the ancient past together through sound. None of this is accidental. The writers built an episode about a circle in time and then wired the music and the structure to behave like a circle too. There are honest holes in the logic, and naming them does not weaken the episode. Squidward survives 2,000 years, frozen in a freezer with no food and no water, which is impossible by any real measure, and only works because the show is a cartoon that bends its own rules when it wants to. The time machine breaks and repairs itself based on Squidward's feelings, rather than on anything mechanical. These are not flaws the show tries to hide. They are the cost of telling a story this strange in 11 minutes, and the episode is clearly more interested in the feeling of the loop than in the science of it. What makes SB-129 matter, beyond the cleverness of the ending, is what it quietly proves about the world the show had just built. A children's cartoon that had existed for only a few months was already willing to put its grumpiest character through genuine despair, to show him getting the solitude he begged for and discovering it was unbearable, and to trap him in a loop he created and cannot escape. The comedy never fully leaves, but underneath the comedy is a real idea about a person who pushes everyone away and then cannot survive the silence that follows. The audience that grew up on this episode absorbed that idea long before they had words for it. Many people remember the white void and the whispering voice for years afterward, often without remembering which episode it came from, because the image of perfect loneliness lodged itself somewhere deep. SB-129 also sets a precedent that the rest of the series would lean on again and again. It establishes, this early, that Bikini Bottom is a place where time can fold, where reality can crack open into an empty room, and where a small, grouchy decision can ripple across 2,000 years. Later episodes would build on exactly this freedom, returning to time loops and impossible places with the confidence of a show that had already proven it could pull them off. The twist at the end of SB-129 is not only a clever joke about jellyfishing, it is the moment the show told its audience that nothing in this world is as fixed or as safe as it looks, and that even the origin of a silly game might hide a small, sad story about a person who could not stand to be near anyone until the moment he finally was alone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. SB-129 showed a town where a single moment could loop back 2,000 years and quietly rewrite the past. The next twist reaches even deeper into the show's history, into a friendship that ended in a single fight, because the most famous food in Bikini Bottom was never supposed to exist, and the two enemies who hate each other most were once the closest of friends. Section 2. The Krabby Patty was an accident. For most of SpongeBob SquarePants, one quiet engine keeps the whole machine running. A tiny green creature named Plankton wants the recipe to the Krabby Patty, and a red crab named Mr. Krabs will do almost anything to keep it from him. That chase shows up in dozens of episodes across the years. Plankton disguises himself, builds robots, shrinks down, sneaks in, and fails. Mr. Krabs guards a single sheet of paper as if it were the most precious thing in the ocean. For a long time, the show never explained why these two hated each other so much, or why a fast food recipe could possibly be worth a lifetime of war. The answer arrived in the spring of 2007, in the first episode of the 5th season, and the answer was sadder and stranger than anyone expected. The most famous food in Bikini Bottom was never supposed to exist at all. Friend or Foe aired on the 13th of April in 2007 as a special, the 156th episode of the series. By then, SpongeBob was no longer the new little show it had been on the last day of 1999. It had survived for years, produced a hit movie in 2004, and changed hands behind the scenes after its creator, Steven Hillenburg, stepped back from running it day to day. The show in this era moved faster and louder than it once had, and it leaned more often on big special events and famous guest gimmicks. Friend or Foe carries some of that heavier, busier feeling. It even ranks low on a personal worst list once shared by Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob. And yet, buried inside this uneven special is one of the most important reveals the series ever committed to: the origin of the rivalry that powers everything everything else. The episode wraps its big story inside a smaller one. It opens with the live-action pirate, Patchy, and his parrot, Potty, working at a restaurant of their own and falling into an argument. Patchy has ideas. Potty keeps shooting them down, and the fight ends with Patchy declaring that he never wants to see his old friend again. He compares the two of them to Mr. Krabs and Plankton, and that comparison becomes the doorway into the cartoon. The framing is doing real work, even if it looks like filler. Before the audience hears a single word about Krabs and Plankton, the episode plants the idea that this is going to be a story about two friends who could not stay friends. Inside Bikini Bottom, the main story begins the way so many Plankton stories begin, with a failed theft. Plankton bursts out of a birthday cake in another attempt to grab the secret formula. SpongeBob, in a panic to protect it, swallows the recipe whole, and later returns it in the way food eventually returns, a crude joke the episode plays for a quick laugh. With the formula safe again and Plankton caught in the open, SpongeBob asks the question the whole series had been avoiding. He wants to know why Mr. Krabs and Plankton are enemies in the first place. Mr. Krabs grows quiet. He tells SpongeBob that there was a time, long ago, when he and Plankton were the best of friends. Eugene Krabs and Sheldon Plankton, the flashback explains, grew up together as boys. They were small, they were odd, and they were picked on. Two outsiders found each other and stuck together, the way lonely kids often do, and they dreamed of making something the whole town would love. What they decided to make was food. They wanted to build a burger good enough to beat the popular, greasy restaurant that everyone in town already went to. So the two friends went to work in a little kitchen, mixing and testing, trying to invent a meal that would put them on the map. In the early going, they had no customers at all. The dream was bigger than the reality, and the reality was an empty restaurant and a recipe that did not yet work. Old Man Jenkins changed everything by being the first person brave enough to walk in and order. The two friends served him their creation, a gray substance they called chum, and watched him take the first bite. For one bright second, it looked like success. Jenkins smiled, and then he collapsed to the floor. The episode plays this as dark comedy, and the accounts inside the episode differ on exactly how bad it was. But the local paper captured the moment with a headline announcing that the so-called plab patty had knocked out Old Man Jenkins. The word plab, stamped across that newspaper, was a blend of plankton and crab. The two names fused together back when the two boys still shared everything, including the blame. The collapse of their first customer is the moment the friendship breaks. Eugene and Sheldon turn on each other instantly, each one accusing the other of ruining the recipe and poisoning the food. The argument becomes a physical fight over the single sheet of paper that held their formula, both of them pulling at it until the page tears clean in two. Plankton is left holding the bottom scrap, which carried only the last line of the instructions, a pinch of chum. That torn fragment is the entire reason the chum bucket exists. Plankton walked away from that fight believing that chum was the secret, and he spent the rest of his life trying to sell it, which is why his restaurant serves the one ingredient nobody wants to eat. The cruelest part of the story is what happens during the fight, in the background, while the two friends are too busy hating each other to notice. As they wrestle over the recipe, a shelf gets knocked loose, and a jumble of ingredients tips off it and tumbles into the pot of batter below. Nobody planned the mixture. Nobody measured it. Nobody even saw it happen. By pure accident, in the middle of a friendship ending, the true Krabby Patty was born. Mr. Krabs ended up with the larger half of the torn recipe and the lucky pot of batter, and the burger that came out of it was wonderful. Plankton ended up with a scrap that said chum and nothing more. One friend stumbled into greatness. The other stumbled into a lifetime of failure, and neither of them ever truly understood that the recipe they fought over so bitterly was something that no person had really created on purpose. What makes Friend or Foe more clever than a simple flashback is that it does not tell the story only once. Mr. Krabs gives his version first, and in his telling, Plankton is the power-hungry one, the friend who wanted control. Plankton then objects and tells the same events back with the roles flipped, painting Mr. Krabs as the greedy one who wanted to rule over the money. The episode is built around the idea that the same memory can be told 3 different ways by 3 different people, each one bending the truth to make themselves look better. Two old enemies cannot agree on what actually happened, because each of them has spent decades rewriting the past in his own favor. The truth only arrives when someone with no reason to lie steps forward. Karen, Plankton's computer wife, finally cuts in and explains that she has the real version because because she was there as a security camera and recorded the whole thing. Her account is the one the episode treats as honest. It confirms the empty restaurant, the brave first customer, the collapse, the accusation, the torn recipe, and the accidental spill that created the patty. By making a machine the only reliable witness, the episode quietly admits that neither crabs nor plankton can be trusted to tell their own story straight. The villain and the hero of this feud are both unreliable narrators of their own lives, and only cold footage can settle it. The story softens both of them, at least for a moment. After hearing how it really happened, after being reminded that they were once two lonely boys with a shared dream, Plankton and Mr. Krabs begin to make peace. They start to apologize. For a few seconds, the oldest war in Bikini Bottom looks like it might finally end, and then Plankton, mid-apology, slips his hand into Mr. Krabs' pocket and lifts the secret formula, and SpongeBob realizes the whole reconciliation was a trick. The chase begins again, the two of them tearing off after each other, and the episode ends exactly where the series always returns, with the friendship lost and the war back on. The reveal does not heal anything, it only explains the wound. There is an honest crack in all of this that deserves to be named. Friend or Foe insists that the Krabby Patty was invented by accident, by two friends during a single fight. Yet in another episode, Enemy In-Law, Mr. Krabs describes the secret formula as an old recipe passed down through the Krabs family. The two stories do not fit together. One says the patty was a happy accident, born from a broken friendship, and the other says it was a family heirloom handed down across generations. The show never resolves this. It is the kind of contradiction that comes from a series running for years under different writers, each adding to the world without checking every earlier claim. And it is worth pointing out, rather than pretending the canon is perfectly tidy. Bikini Bottom has never been a place that worried much about keeping its own history straight. Even the small details carry that loose, slightly broken feeling. Old Man Jenkins appears as an old man in the flashback, even though the flashback is supposed to take place when Krabs and Plankton were children, which would make Jenkins impossibly ancient. Plankton speaks with the same grown voice as a boy that he uses as an adult. These are the fingerprints of a cartoon that cares more about the joke and the feeling than about strict logic, and naming them does not take anything away from the reveal. If anything, it fits the larger truth of the episode, which is that memory in Bikini Bottom is unreliable by nature. The reason this twist matters so much is that it changes how every earlier Plankton story can be watched. Before Friend or Foe, Plankton was a simple villain, a tiny green nuisance with a big ego and a bad restaurant. After Friend or Foe, every one of his schemes carries a shadow of something sadder underneath it. The little creature breaking into the Krusty Krab again and again is not only chasing money, he is chasing a recipe he believes was half his, taken from him in the worst moment of his life, beside the only friend he ever really had. His failure is not just funny anymore. It is the ongoing aftermath of a friendship that died over a torn piece of paper and a pot of batter that mixed itself. The show even nods to this later, in another episode where Plankton refers to SpongeBob as his old friend, hinting that the loneliness underneath the villainy never fully went away. For the children watching in 2007, and for the adults who had grown up with the show since 1999, Friend or Foe slipped a surprisingly grown idea into a loud holiday special. It suggested that the people we fight with the hardest are sometimes the people we were once closest to. It suggested that the things we treasure most might have come to us by accident, and that we might spend our whole lives guarding something we never truly earned. And it suggested, gently, that two people can remember the same day in completely different ways, each certain that they were the wronged one. All of that sits inside a story about a hamburger. The Krabby Patty, the object at the center of the entire series, turns out to have no grand origin and no master chef behind it. It was an accident that fell from a shelf while two friends were busy ending their friendship, and the war over it has never stopped since. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Friend or Foe revealed that the show's greatest rivalry began as a friendship, and that its most famous food was nothing more than a lucky accident. The next twist trades the kitchen for the dark when the Krusty Krab stays open through the night and something terrible seems to be coming for it. Because the monster everyone feared at that counter was never real, and the truth waiting behind it was far stranger. Section 3. The monster was never there. The Krusty Krab is, for most of the series, series, the safest place in Bikini Bottom. It is where SpongeBob is happiest, where the smell of grilling patties fills the air, and where the worst thing that usually happens is Squidward losing his patience at the register. The restaurant belongs to daytime. It belongs to crowds and sunlight, and the cheerful noise of a busy lunch rush. So when an episode takes that same familiar place and empties it out, turns off most of the lights, and lets the night settle over it, something feels wrong long before anything frightening actually happens. That is the trick at the center of one of the most beloved and genuinely unsettling episodes the show ever made. An episode where a terrifying monster stalks the Krusty Krab, and where the monster was never real to begin with. Graveyard Shift arrived in the second season, airing on the 6th of September in 2002, paired with a softer episode called Krusty Love. It sits in the stretch of the series that many viewers consider its finest. The early run when the show was at the height of its powers and still being guided closely by its creator. Audiences have rewarded it ever since, and it carries one of the highest ratings of any episode the show produced. Part of its strength comes from the people who built it. Dan Povenmire, who would later go on to co-create Phineas and Ferb, worked on this episode as a storyboard director and writer, and the careful, patient timing of its scares shows the hand of someone who understood exactly how to make a comedy frightening without breaking the comedy. Everything that goes wrong in the episode begins, fittingly, with money. Mr. Krabs decides that closing the Krusty Krab at night is a waste of profit, and he announces that from now on, the restaurant will stay open 24 hours a day. There are no customers at that hour, or almost none, but the chance to squeeze a few extra coins out of the dark is too tempting for him to pass up. SpongeBob, ever eager, treats the night shift as an adventure. Squidward treats it as a punishment. The two of them are left alone together in the empty restaurant through the long, quiet hours when nobody sane is awake, and boredom quickly curdles into something else. Greed put them there. Greed is the reason the lights are on at 3 in the morning at all, and greed is the quiet first cause of the terror that follows, even though nobody in the episode ever names it that way. To pass the time and to torment his coworker, Squidward invents a ghost story. He tells SpongeBob about the hash-slinging Slasher, a former fry cook who once worked at the Krusty Krab long ago. As Squidward spins it, this fry cook accidentally cut off his own hand on the job and replaced it with a rusty spatula, then was struck and killed by a bus. According to the legend, the dead cook now returns to the restaurant, and his arrival is announced by a set of warning signs. The lights will flicker on their own, the phone will ring with no one on the other end, and a bus, one that should not be running at that hour, will pull up outside. Squidward delivers all of this purely to scare SpongeBob, and at first, it works only as a joke. He even stumbles over the monster's name again and again, mangling it into a string of silly variations, which keeps the whole thing feeling like a harmless prank rather than a real threat. The genius of the episode is what happens next, because the warning signs begin to come true one by one. The lights start to flicker without anyone touching the switch. Squidward tells himself it means nothing, that old wiring flickers, that there is no reason to worry. Then the phone rings, and when it is answered, there is only silence on the line. His confidence starts to crack. SpongeBob, strangely, stays calm, because SpongeBob is convinced that Squidward is still pranking him and refuses to take any of it seriously, which only makes Squidward more frightened, since he knows he made the whole story up, and yet the signs keep arriving anyway. The roles quietly reverse. The one who invented the monster becomes the one who is terrified of it, while the intended victim laughs along, untouched. The final sign is the worst. A bus pulls up outside the Krusty Krab in the dead of night, exactly as the legend promised, even though Squidward had insisted that no buses run that late. From the bus steps a tall, hunched figure. It has a humpback, a small head with glowing red eyes, and where one of its hands should be, there is a spatula. The shape crosses the street, taps on the glass with its spatula, and pushes open the door. Squidward is paralyzed. SpongeBob finally begins to grasp that something is genuinely happening. The dark figure moves slowly toward the counter, and the episode lets the dread stretch out, holding the moment far longer than a comedy normally would, letting the fear sit until it becomes almost unbearable. In the middle of that terror, Squidward says something he would never say in the daylight. Convinced he may be about to die, he turns to SpongeBob and confesses that no matter what he has said over the years, he has always sort of liked him. It is a small line, easy to miss under the fear, and the show does not dwell on it, yet it rhymes with the loneliest moment of the entire series, the one from years earlier when Squidward, trapped in an empty void, admitted that he missed missed SpongeBob. Both moments share the same quiet truth about the character. Squidward only ever drops his armor when he believes he has nothing left to lose, when he is either completely alone or convinced he is about to be gone. Fear, like total solitude, strips him down to the affection he spends every ordinary day denying. And then the episode pulls the rug out. The terrifying figure reaches the counter, and the truth turns out to be almost embarrassingly ordinary. The shape belongs to a nervous teenager who simply walked in looking for a job application. What looked like a humpback is the young fish's head. What looked like a tiny head with red eyes is actually his nose and nostrils. The spatula was being held the whole time in his real hand, hidden up his sleeve. Even the silent phone call gets a plain explanation. The teenager had called the restaurant earlier and hung up out of nervousness, which is why the line went quiet. Every single sign that seemed supernatural had a dull human cause. There was no dead fry cook, there was no curse. There was only an anxious kid trying to find work in the middle of the night, and a string of coincidences that lined up perfectly with a story Squidward made up on the spot. The episode could have ended there, on the lesson that the scary story was nothing and the world is more boring than our fears. Instead, it adds one more twist that refuses to make sense, and that refusal is the reason the ending is so famous. After the teenager is explained away, the lights are still flickering, and the camera reveals who has been doing it. Standing at the light switch, flicking it on and off for no reason at all, is Nosferatu, the gaunt, bald, clawed vampire pulled straight out of the silent horror film from 1922. The characters do not treat him as a deadly monster. They treat him as an annoying pest who will not stop playing with the lights. He is scolded rather than feared, and the episode simply ends on that image, offering no explanation for why a 100-year-old movie vampire is haunting the electrical system of an underwater burger restaurant. A few honest notes belong here, because the episode is built on borrowed pieces. The vampire is repeatedly called Nosferatu in the show, but that is the title of the film, not the name of the character. The figure is actually Count Orlok, the vampire played by the German actor Max Schreck in that 1922 movie, and the images used in the episode were taken directly from the film itself. There is a small, almost eerie coincidence buried in the production. The episode aired on the 6th of September, which happens to be Max Schreck's birthday, since the actor who first played that vampire was born on that day in 1879. Whether the date was chosen on purpose or fell that way by chance is not something the show ever confirmed, so it is fairer to call it a striking coincidence than a hidden plan. There are also small visual slips, the kind that come from making animation quickly. In one shot, the night sky outside the window looks ordinary, and in the very next, it has turned a sickly green, filled with strange, misshapen clouds, and it stays that unsettling color for the rest of the episode. Whether that green sky was a deliberate mood choice or a coloring error is unclear, but it adds to the wrongness of the night either way. What lifts Graveyard Shift above a simple, scary story is how cleanly it works on two levels at once. As a piece of craft, it is a small lesson in fear. The episode shows that dread does not come from the monster itself, but from the waiting, from the slow arrival of the signs, from the gap between when something feels wrong and when the truth finally appears. It builds tension honestly and then releases it twice, first with a mundane answer that calms everyone down, and then with an absurd answer that no one can calm down from because it cannot be explained. The first twist is reassuring. The second twist quietly suggests that the world of Bikini Bottom is genuinely strange in ways that no clever explanation can fully tidy up, and that something truly odd really was in the building the whole time. For the children who watched it, the episode delivered a feeling that stuck for years. Many of them learned, through this single story, that the scariest part of a ghost tale is the buildup, and that the thing under the bed is usually just a nervous kid with a job application. But they also learned that some things have no neat answer at all, that a vampire might simply be standing at the switch with no reason given, and that the universe sometimes refuses to make sense, no matter how carefully a story is solved. The hash-slinging slasher went on to become one of the most quoted pieces of the entire series, repeated and joked about long after the episode aired, and Nosferatu himself returned again and again in later episodes, quietly promoted from a one-time gag into a recurring resident of the show's world. The monster at the counter was never the point. The real engines of the episode were a crab who could not bear to close his restaurant for the night, a lonely cook who frightened himself with his own own story, and a tired teenager who only wanted a job. Underneath all the dread, Graveyard Shift is about how easily fear fills an empty room, and how often the thing we are terrified of turns out to be ordinary, harmless, and looking for nothing more than a chance. The twist is that there was nothing to fear. The deeper twist is that something genuinely inexplicable was there anyway, flicking the lights, asking for nothing, and refusing to leave. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Graveyard Shift built a monster out of nothing and revealed that the real fear came from greed, loneliness, and a string of coincidences. The next twist works the other way around, taking something that looks like a harmless joke and letting it turn out to be deadly serious. Because in one early episode, a gift given out of spite was hiding a real danger, and the punchline actually went off. Section 4. When the joke turns out to be real. There is a kind of joke the show returns to again and again, where something silly is said early on, and then, much later, the show simply decides to mean it. A throwaway line becomes a real event. A harmless gag turns out to have teeth. The previous twist worked by building a terrifying monster and then revealing there was nothing to fear at all. This one works in the opposite direction. It takes an object that looks completely harmless, a dessert, a gift between coworkers, and slowly reveals that the danger was real the whole time, that the punchline was loaded, and that the explosion everyone joked about was actually coming. The episode is called Dying for Pie, and it remains one of the darkest premises the series ever built an entire story around. Dying for Pie aired in the winter of 2001 during the second season, paired with the episode Imitation Crabs. It belongs to the same golden stretch as Graveyard Shift, the early years when the show was at its sharpest and most confident. The premise begins with something gentle and almost sweet. The Krusty Krab is holding Employee Brotherhood Day, a small workplace event where the staff are expected to exchange gifts as a sign of friendship. SpongeBob, who treats every holiday as the best day of his life, throws himself into it completely. Squidward, who treats every day at the Krusty Krab as a slow punishment, wants nothing to do with it. He has no interest in making a gift, and even less interest in pretending to care about brotherhood with the neighbor he spends most of his time avoiding. Squidward solves his problem the lazy way, and the lazy way is what dooms everyone. Rather than make something himself, he slips outside and buys a pie from a passing crew of pirates. The pirates, in the middle of the sale, let slip a detail they probably should have kept to themselves. The pies are not really pies, they are bombs. For a moment, Squidward hears this clearly, and any reasonable person would walk away. But then he mentions, almost as an afterthought, that he would have been willing to pay for a pie anyway, and the pirates immediately sense money. They take back the warning, claim they were only kidding about the whole bomb business, and happily sell him one for $25. Squidward, who wants this errand over with, chooses to believe the convenient lie rather than the dangerous truth. He buys the bomb because buying the bomb is easier than thinking about it. The danger nearly goes off long before SpongeBob is ever involved. Squidward brings the pie inside and tries to pass it off as something he made himself, hoping to fulfill the gift requirement and return to his miserable routine. Mr. Krabs intercepts him. Krabs insists on inspecting the pie first, reasoning that he cannot afford to let his best fry cook get sick from a bad dessert. He breaks off a tiny piece of the crust and steps away to fetch some milk. Then he trips, and that single crumb of pie hits the floor, and the back wall of the office is torn apart in an explosion that throws both Krabs and Squidward outside. A crumb, one small piece of crust, was enough to blow out a wall. The pirates were telling the truth all along, and now the proof is smoking in the ruins of the office. What happens next turns a dark gag into a genuine crisis. When Squidward and Mr. Krabs rush back inside, the pie is gone. SpongeBob is there, licking his lips and cheerfully thanking Squidward for the wonderful gift, and every sign points to the obvious and horrifying conclusion. SpongeBob appears to have eaten the bomb. Mr. Krabs does the grim math out loud, explaining that the explosive will go off around sunset, once it has worked its way down to SpongeBob's lower intestine. He says, with disturbing calm, that he has seen this exact thing happen 11 times before. There is no way to get SpongeBob to a hospital in time. By their understanding, the cheerful little fry cook now has only one day left to live, and it is Squidward's fault, because Squidward bought a bomb to avoid the effort of making a friend a real gift. Guilt does to Squidward what fear did to him in the dark of the Krusty Krab. It cracks his shell. Believing he has accidentally doomed SpongeBob, Squidward sets out to give him a perfect perfect final day. He follows SpongeBob around and grants the things SpongeBob has always wanted from him: the attention and the kindness and the shared time that Squidward normally refuses to give. SpongeBob, who has no idea he is supposedly dying, is overjoyed simply to spend a day with the neighbor he adores. He even makes Squidward a heartfelt gift in return, a sweater woven from his own tears of happiness. The whole sequence is played mostly straight, with real warmth underneath the comedy, and it carries a quiet and uncomfortable idea. Squidward is only this generous because he believes the clock has run out. The kindness is real, but it took a death sentence to unlock it. The day winds down toward its final item, watching the sunset together, the exact moment Mr. Krabs predicted the bomb would detonate. Squidward, unable to bear the thought of watching SpongeBob die in front of him, builds a brick wall between the two of them as a shield, then stands behind it and counts down the seconds in agony. The sun sinks. An explosion goes off. Squidward, certain that the worst has happened, breaks down and weeps over the loss of the friend he treated so badly for so long, mourning a SpongeBob he believes is gone. And in that grief, the episode plays its first reversal. The explosion did not come from inside SpongeBob. It came from a bubble that SpongeBob had blown, a bubble shaped exactly like a bomb, which popped harmlessly. SpongeBob is completely fine. He was never in danger from anything in his stomach. Squidward's relief curdles instantly into fury, and the fury sets up the real twist. He cannot understand how SpongeBob survived, and he finally blurts out the truth he had been hiding all day, that the pie was a bomb, and that SpongeBob was supposed to have exploded after eating it. SpongeBob is confused for a moment, and then understanding dawns. He never ate the pie at all. He had kept it tucked in his pocket the entire time, saving it so that the two of them could share it together, since that is what friends do on Employee Brotherhood Day. The bomb was never inside him. It was riding around in his pocket through every tender moment of the supposed last day, a live explosive, sitting quietly through the bucket list and the sunset and the sweater of tears. The ending lands the joke that the whole episode had been holding back. SpongeBob pulls out the pie to share it, takes a step towards Squidward, and trips on a rock. The pie flies through the air and strikes Squidward directly in the face, and it goes off. The blast is enormous, far larger than anything that should come from a single dessert, and it engulfs not just the Krusty Krab, but the entire surrounding ocean, leaving Bikini Bottom a charred and twisted ruin. After all of that destruction, Squidward emerges from the wreckage, soot-covered and barely standing, and the only thing he can manage to say is a small, flat ow. The danger that was set up in the very first minutes finally arrives in the very last seconds, delivered not to the person everyone feared for, but to the person who caused the whole mess in the first place. One production choice in that final explosion deserves to be named plainly, because it is real and it matters later in this video. The gigantic blast at the end of Dying for Pie is not drawn animation. It is actual live action footage of a real nuclear weapons test, specifically the Baker shot from Operation Crossroads, a detonation that the United States carried out in the Pacific. That footage was filmed at a place called Bikini Atoll. The show reached for genuine atomic test footage to blow up its cartoon town, and it chose footage from the very real island whose name sits at the root of Bikini Bottom. For now, it is enough to record this as a fact about how the episode was made. Its full strangeness will become clear in the second half of this story, when the connection between the cartoon and that real test site stops looking like a coincidence. There are honest gaps in the episode, the kind the show never bothered to fix. Earlier in the story, SpongeBob is shown smacking his lips and rubbing his belly, thanking Squidward and even commenting on the flavor, all of which is what convinces Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and the audience that he ate the pie. Yet at the end, it turns out he never touched it. What exactly he was eating in that moment is never explained, left dangling as a loose thread that only exists to fool everyone into believing he was doomed. The timing of the survival is convenient, and the reveal that he had the bomb in his pocket the whole time raises questions the show has no interest in answering. These are not deep flaws so much as the seams of a cartoon that cares far more about the feeling of the joke than about keeping every detail in order, and they are worth pointing out rather than smoothing over. What makes Dying for Pie endure, beyond the famous explosion, is the quiet thing it understands about people. The episode is built around a simple and slightly bitter observation, that kindness often arrives only when someone believes the time for it is almost gone. Squidward spends spends an ordinary lifetime being cold to SpongeBob, and it takes a false death sentence to make him warm. Then, the moment the danger seems to pass, his warmth vanishes and his irritation snaps right back. The bomb, in the end, does not punish SpongeBob, who never did anything wrong. It punishes Squidward, the one who tried to fake a friendship with a purchase, who believed the easy lie over the dangerous truth, and who only learned to be gentle when he thought it no longer counted. The contrast with the monster at the Krusty Krab is exact and deliberate, even across two different episodes. In one story, the terrifying thing turns out to be harmless, a nervous teenager and a string of coincidences. In this story, the harmless thing turns out to be terrifying, a pleasant little pie that levels a city. Together, they show a series that loved to play with the gap between how something looks and what it actually is, that could deflate a fear into nothing or inflate a joke into a catastrophe, and that trusted its young audience to handle the whiplash of both. The pie really was a bomb. The joke was never a joke, and the explosion everyone laughed about at the start was patiently waiting at the end, ready to go off the instant nobody expected it anymore. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Dying for Pie revealed that the show would happily let a harmless gift turn into a real bomb, and it even borrowed footage of a real nuclear test to do it. The next twist is the biggest leap the series ever took, rising up out of Bikini Bottom entirely. Because once the story breaks the surface of the water, it reveals a whole world living above the sea, and the town below was never as alone as it seemed. Section 5. The World Above the Water. For its first several years, SpongeBob SquarePants kept its entire world sealed inside one ocean. Bikini Bottom was a place where fish drove cars, where a sponge flipped burgers, and where the only sky anyone ever saw was made of water. The show hinted, now and then, that something existed beyond that world. Sandy Cheeks came from dry land and lived inside a glass dome full of air. The occasional deep-sea diver's boot would stomp through a gag, but the surface was always a rumor, a thing at the edge of the frame, never fully shown. Then, in 2004, the series did something it had never done before. It rose all the way up out of the water, broke through the surface, and revealed that above the cartoon ocean, there was a real human world, lit by a real sun, that had no idea the town below even existed. That revelation came in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and it permanently changed the size of everything. The movie was not meant to be a beginning. Steven Hillenburg, the marine science teacher who created the show, built the film as an ending. He had run the series for 3 seasons, and he intended this story to be the finale, the place where SpongeBob's world wrapped up for good. He halted production on the show to make it, directed it himself, and poured into it the feeling of a final chapter. The network had other plans, and after the movie, the show continued for many more years under different hands, which is part of why the film feels so different in tone from the episodes around it. Watching it now, it carries the weight of a goodbye that was never allowed to be a goodbye, a planned conclusion that the world kept reopening. The story begins with a small, familiar heartbreak. Mr. Krabs opens a second restaurant, the Krusty Krab 2, right next door to the first, and SpongeBob is certain he will finally be named manager. He has waited his whole working life for this. Instead, Mr. Krabs passes him over and gives the job to Squidward, explaining that SpongeBob is just a kid, too young and too immature for the responsibility. That single word, kid, becomes the wound the entire movie circles. SpongeBob is crushed, and he spends the night drowning his sorrow at the Goofy Goober ice cream parlor, the childhood spot he loves most, unaware that something far larger is about to land on him. Plankton, meanwhile, sets his greatest scheme into motion, the one he calls Plan Z. After thousands of failed attempts to steal the Krabby Patty formula, he reaches past the restaurant entirely and aims at the whole ocean. He steals the crown of King Neptune, the ruler of the sea, and arranges for it to be sent far away to a dreaded and distant place called Shell City. Then he frames Mr. Krabs for the theft. Neptune arrives in a fury, ready to execute Krabs for the crime, and freezes him in place as punishment. The formula that began as a happy accident between 2 boyhood friends, the recipe torn in half during a single fight, has now become the center of a plan to enslave an entire civilization. Everything traces back to that little sheet of paper, and now that paper has put Mr. Krabs one breath away from death. SpongeBob steps forward to save him, and the reason he is allowed to go matters. He argues that he can make the dangerous journey to Shell City to recover the crown, and to prove he is capable, he insists that he is is not a kid, but a grown man. Neptune gives him a few days. With Patrick at his side, SpongeBob sets out across a world that gets stranger and more hostile the farther they travel from home. They drive a small car shaped like a Krabby Patty. They survive a terrifying trench full of monsters. Along the way, they meet Mindy, Neptune's daughter, who wants to help them find their courage. She cannot actually give them what they need, so she fakes it. She presses fake mustaches made of seaweed onto their faces and tells them she has magically transformed them from kids into men. The trick works because confidence was the only thing they were ever missing, and they march on, believing they have grown up. The mustaches are the setup for the moment the whole movie turns. On the far side of the trench, the pair are confronted by Dennis, a hired killer sent by Plankton to make sure they never reach Shell City. Dennis casually rips the fake mustaches off their faces, proving they are still just two scared kids, and raises his enormous spiked boot to crush them. And then, with no warning, an even bigger boot comes down and flattens Dennis instead. The boot does not belong to another sea monster. It belongs to a human being, a massive hard hat diver, the kind a real person would wear to walk on the ocean floor, reaches down, scoops up SpongeBob and Patrick, and carries them away. The sea creatures of the movie had spoken of this figure in whispers, calling him a cyclops, treating him as a legendary monster. He is no monster at all. He is a man in a diving suit, and he is about to take them somewhere that breaks the boundary of the entire series. Shell City, the dreaded faraway place that the sea feared, turns out to be a gift shop on a beach. Above the water, in the human world, the diver runs a little tourist store that sells dried out sea creatures as souvenirs, cheap knickknacks for people on vacation. The mythical destination is a roadside trinket stand, and the terrible Cyclops is just a shopkeeper. The image is genuinely grim once it settles. Every dead, dried, posed sea creature on those shelves was once alive, a being like SpongeBob, captured and drained and turned into a decoration for humans who never wondered whether it could think or feel. SpongeBob and Patrick find Neptune's crown sitting among the merchandise, and then the diver switches on a powerful heat lamp and begins to dry them out alive. The two of them slowly desiccate under the light, weakening, fading, and the movie actually lets them die. Their rescue comes from the one thing they were mocked for the whole film. As they fade, SpongeBob and Patrick cry, and their tears, the tears of two kids who never stopped being kids, run down a wire and short-circuit the heat lamp. The smoke from the short circuit triggers the building's sprinkler system, and the falling water revives them, restoring their color and their cartoon shape. The same water brings back to life every other dried sea creature in the shop, an entire shelf of victims suddenly waking up. Together, the revived creatures swarm the diver and overwhelm him, and SpongeBob and Patrick grab the crown and run for the beach, escaping the human store with the prize that can save Mr. Krabs. Stranded on the sand with no way home, they are saved by another human. David Hasselhoff appears, playing himself as a lifeguard, and offers the two of them a ride. He sets them on his back and swims across the open ocean at impossible speed, a real man carrying two cartoon creatures over real waves, while Dennis makes one last attempt to stop them and is knocked away beneath a passing boat. The sight of a famous human actor ferrying SpongeBob across the surface of the sea is played for laughs, but underneath the joke is the same quiet revelation the whole second half has been building. The world above the water is real. It has people and beaches and boats and stores, and it sits directly on top of Bikini Bottom, completely indifferent to the little town breathing below. The ending returns to the kid. SpongeBob and Patrick reach Bikini Bottom just as Neptune prepares to finish off Mr. Krabs, and they hand over the crown in time to save him. Then Plankton springs the rest of Plan Z. He drops a mind control helmet onto Neptune and reveals that he has already enslaved the entire population of Bikini Bottom, every citizen now wearing one of his bucket helmets, the town fully conquered. Surrounded and outnumbered, SpongeBob finally stops trying to be a man. He accepts, out loud, that he is a kid, and that being a kid is exactly what let him do everything he just did. He turns that acceptance into a song, a loud burst of rock and roll, and the music breaks Plankton's control and frees the town. Plankton is arrested, Krabs is unfrozen, the formula is safe, and SpongeBob's victory comes from embracing the very thing he spent the whole movie ashamed of. What lingers, long after the music ends, is the surface. The show had spent years building a world that felt complete on its own, a closed ocean with its own rules. The movie cracked that world open and showed what sits above it, and the answer reframes everything underneath. Bikini Bottom is not a separate fantasy realm floating in nowhere. It rests at the bottom of a real sea, beneath a real sky, under the feet of real humans who walk the beach, sell its dead as souvenirs, and never once look down. The choice to render the surface in live action rather than animation drives the point home. The world above is filmed like the real world because, within the logic of the movie, it is the real world. The cartoon lives at the bottom of it. That single reveal is the perfect bridge into the second half of this story. For 5 sections, the focus has stayed on what the show openly told its audience: the loops and the accidents and the bombs and the monsters that the writers built on purpose and let the characters discover. From here, the ground shifts. The questions stop being about what the show said and start being about what the show may have buried, the patterns hiding under the comedy, the theories that the bright surface was quietly resting on top of the entire time. And the first of those theories begins exactly where this movie left off, at the line between the cartoon ocean and the real one, with a real island, a real name, and a real and terrible piece of history that the town below may have been born from. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The movie revealed a real human world resting directly above Bikini Bottom, a surface that treats the town below as decoration and never looks down. That single line between the cartoon sea and the real one opens the door to the strangest theory of all, because the island the whole town is named after is a real place, and what happened there was anything but a joke. Section 6. The bomb that made Bikini Bottom. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, about halfway between Hawaii and Papua New Guinea, there is a quiet ring of small islands wrapped around a wide blue lagoon. The water there is clear and warm. Coral grows beneath the surface, and from the air the whole shape looks like a thin green necklace laid across the sea. The place is called Bikini Atoll, an anglicized version of its older name, Bikini, and it belongs to a scattered nation called the Marshall Islands. For most of human history, it was a small and peaceful home to a few hundred people who fished its waters and lived along its shores. To anyone looking at it today, it seems like one of the most beautiful and untouched corners of the world. The truth of what happened there is the opposite of peaceful, and once it is understood, the brightest cartoon on television begins to look very different. After the Second World War ended, the United States was given control of a vast stretch of the northern Pacific, including the Marshall Islands, and it chose Bikini Atoll as a place to test the most destructive weapons ever invented. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons on these islands. The first of these came in 1946, under a program called Operation Crossroads, and to make room for the blasts, the people who lived there were moved away from their homes. In 1946, the US government removed 167 Bikinians and relocated them to the islands of Rongerik, east of Bikini, where they experienced starvation because of inadequate food crops. They were told they would be able to return once the testing was finished. For most of them, that day never came. The largest of those tests has a name that still carries weight among people who study the nuclear age. On March 1st, 1954, a detonation on Bikini Atoll, known as Bravo, created an explosion equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. The blast was so enormous that it spread radioactive fallout across a huge area, poisoning nearby islands and the people on them. The damage did not fade with the smoke. The radiation soaked into the soil and the water and stayed there. The displaced Bikini people became exiles who cannot return to their ancestral homelands due to radiation contamination that will not dissipate for thousands of years. A small group was allowed back in the 1970s, but they were removed again at the end of that decade after it was discovered that they had absorbed dangerous levels of radioactive material simply by living there and eating local food. The beautiful ring of islands became a place where human beings could no longer safely exist. That real place, with that real and painful history, is the source of one of the most enduring fan theories about SpongeBob SquarePants, and the theory begins with the simplest possible piece of evidence. The town is named after the atoll. SpongeBob and his friends do not live in some invented underwater kingdom with a made-up name. They live in Bikini Bottom, the bottom of Bikini Atoll, directly beneath the exact lagoon where the United States tested dozens of nuclear weapons. The lonely island that floats above the water in the opening of nearly every episode, the same island that appears appears in the movie when David Hasselhoff carries SpongeBob across the sea is widely understood to be Bikini Atoll itself. The connection is not hidden in some distant corner. It is stamped on the front of the show, in its title and its opening shot. From that starting point, the theory builds a larger and stranger claim. It suggests that the talking, walking, working sea creatures of Bikini Bottom exist because of the radiation. In this reading, the nuclear tests that poisoned the real atoll mutated the ordinary sea life below into the strange, intelligent, oddly human characters the show follows. A simple sea sponge became a sponge that flips burgers and pays rent. A starfish became a creature that speaks and dreams and forgets. The theory points to several details across the series as supporting evidence, woven into the show like clues. The clothing and the design of Bikini Bottom often echo the fashion of the 1940s and 1950s, the exact decades of the testing. Some versions of the theory cite an early script that supposedly referenced Bikini Atoll directly, though it is worth being honest that this script is unverified and should be treated as rumor rather than proof. The strongest piece of evidence the theory leans on is something this very video has already touched. Across the series, when a truly massive explosion goes off, the shape of the blast tends to resemble a mushroom cloud, the unmistakable signature of a nuclear detonation. The clearest example was discussed earlier in this story. At the end of Dying for Pi, when the bomb finally goes off and levels the entire town, the show did not draw that explosion. It used real footage of an actual nuclear test, the Baker shot from Operation Crossroads, filmed at Bikini Atoll itself. A children's cartoon reached for genuine atomic test footage from the very island its town is named after and dropped it into the middle of an episode about a pie. Once the nuclear theory is in mind, that choice stops feeling like a random gag and starts feeling like a quiet admission. Supporters of the theory also point to Rock Bottom, the dark, deep, alien town where SpongeBob once got lost, suggesting it resembles a crater left behind by a blast. And they note that Sandy Cheeks is a land animal beneath the sea, explained by the fact that small animals were placed aboard Navy ships during the tests to measure the effects of radiation. For many years, the theory lived only in fan forums and online videos, the kind of idea people enjoyed without ever expecting confirmation. That changed in late 2024. During a reunion conversation organized by Esquire, the main voice cast of the show sat together and were asked about their favorite fan theories, and the subject of the nuclear origin came up. Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton and has written many episodes of the show, confirmed the fan theory that Bikini Bottom was the result of nuclear testing. He did not treat it as a wild guess. He stated plainly that it was true, and he described how the show was built to represent the theoretical results of the real atomic testing at Bikini Atoll. He went further to claim the show takes place after a post-apocalyptic war. One of his fellow cast members reacted with surprise, having spent years telling people the theory was false, and Lawrence simply confirmed it again. This is the point where honesty matters most, because a confirmation from one writer in a casual interview is not the same as a settled official fact, and the situation is messier than a clean answer. The post-apocalyptic version that Lawrence described does not fully match what the show itself has put on screen. The movie clearly depicts a living, thriving human world above the water, full of beaches and tourists and lifeguards, which is difficult to square with the idea that the human world was destroyed in some great war. This does not line up with how the show is presented, with human society showing up in various forms across the series and movies. There is also an earlier and more cautious official response on record. A Nickelodeon representative seemingly quashed the legitimacy of the Bikini Atoll theory in an email statement, writing that the show is set in Bikini Bottom. So the picture is genuinely split. A writer who helped make the show says the radioactive origin is true and always was part of the fun of how far they pushed the concept, while the network once gave a flat, dismissive answer, and the writer's grander apocalyptic version contradicts the show's own footage. The connection to the real atoll is undeniable. The full mutation story sits somewhere between intended joke, loose inspiration, and something the people who made the show enjoyed leaving ambiguous. What gives this theory its weight is not whether every detail can be proven. It is the way it transforms the feeling of the entire series once it settles in. A show that millions of children watched as the purest comfort, the brightest and silliest thing on television, may rest its whole foundation on one of the darkest events of the 20th century. century. The cheerful undersea paradise sits at the bottom of a lagoon that real people were forced to abandon, a place still so poisoned that they cannot go home thousands of years later. The endless sunshine of Bikini Bottom floats directly above a wound in the real world, a wound that never healed. There is something quietly haunting in the idea that the most optimistic show ever made for children grew, in the imagination of its own writers, out of the ashes of a weapon that erased a way of life. The reveal from the movie returns here with new meaning. The surface world that looks down on Bikini Bottom, the humans who walk the beach and sell its dead as souvenirs and never wonder what lives below, are in this reading the same kind of people who once stood on ships and watched the bombs go off, the same indifference that turned a home into a test site. The town below survives in spite of the surface, finding joy and color and song in a place that was supposed to be lifeless. Seen that way, SpongeBob's relentless, unbreakable happiness becomes something more than a character trait. It becomes the response of an entire community choosing to live brightly in a place the world above tried to destroy and then forgot. The bomb that may have made Bikini Bottom did not make it sad. It made it stubborn and joyful and alive, in a way that feels almost like defiance. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The nuclear theory suggests the whole town was born from radiation, a bright paradise resting on top of a real and poisoned wound. The next theory turns inward, away from the water and toward the characters themselves, because a long-running idea claims that each member of the main cast quietly stands for one of the 7 deadly sins, and the people who made the show have given a careful, complicated answer about whether that was ever the plan. Section 7. 7 Sins Under the Sea. Long before any cartoon existed, people told stories about the small handful of weaknesses that could quietly ruin a person from the inside. In Christian tradition, drawn from passages in Proverbs and Galatians, these came to be known as the 7 deadly sins, named as gluttony, lust, sloth, greed, wrath, envy, and pride. They were never meant to be monsters or villains. They were meant to be ordinary human failings, the kind that hide inside good people and shape their lives without ever announcing themselves. For centuries, artists used them as a way to understand character, giving each figure in a painting or a play a single dominant flaw so that audiences could see a piece of themselves in every one. There is a long-running theory that SpongeBob SquarePants did the same thing, quietly, beneath all the color and the laughter, and that the 7 creatures at the center of the show are not just friends and neighbors, but a complete gallery of human weakness. The theory assigns one sin to each of the main characters, and the matches are surprisingly tidy. In the most common version of the theory, SpongeBob himself is lust, Patrick is sloth, Squidward is wrath, Sandy is pride, Mr. Krabs is greed, Plankton is envy, and Gary the Snail is gluttony. Laid out together, the list covers the entire set of classic sins, with no gaps and no overlaps, which is part of why the idea has stayed alive for so long. Each character is built around one exaggerated trait, and each of those traits happens to line up with one of the 7, as if the writers had quietly handed every member of the cast a single flaw to carry. The pleasure of the theory is in testing it, walking through each character one at a time and seeing how well the shoe fits. Mr. Krabs is the easiest to place, and the show makes almost no effort to hide it. He is greed in its purest cartoon form. He talks about his own customers as money walking out the door. He runs his restaurant on the belief that money comes before almost anything else, and he proves it again and again by underpaying and overworking his staff, and by putting the people closest to him in danger over small amounts of cash. For many children, Mr. Krabs served as a first introduction to the very idea of greed, a money-hungry figure who values profit over the health, safety, and happiness of those around him. His greed is not a one-time joke. It is the engine of his character, and it has set entire episodes in motion. The terror of the night shift at the Krusty Krab, discussed earlier in this story, only happened because Mr. Krabs could not stand to close his restaurant and lose a few coins overnight. The fight that destroyed his oldest friendship ship, the one that accidentally created the Krabby Patty, was rooted in the same hunger for more. Patrick fits his sin almost as cleanly. He is sloth, the love of doing nothing, raised to an art form. His laziness is so complete that the show once gave him an award for accomplishing absolutely nothing at all, a joke that only works because everyone understands that idleness is his entire nature. He sleeps under a rock. He avoids effort the way other characters avoid danger, and yet the show rarely punishes him for it, which is part of what makes him strangely lovable. Patrick is sloth without cruelty, a creature so at peace with his own emptiness that his laziness reads as a kind of innocence rather than a flaw. Squidward carries wrath, the slow burning anger that never quite cools. His sin shows up most often as small cruelties, the sharp comments and the petty pranks aimed at the neighbors he cannot escape. Sometimes it grows into something darker. In the episode Dying for Pie, it was Squidward's disdain that set off the entire chain of events, leading him to hand SpongeBob a gift he had no real warmth behind. His anger is rarely loud. It lives in his face, in his sighs, in the way he treats kindness as a burden. The earlier sections of this story showed how rare it is for Squidward to drop that anger, and how only fear or total loneliness can crack it open. The rest of the time, wrath is the lens through which he sees the world. Sandy Cheeks is matched with pride, and the fit is gentle rather than harsh. She is the smartest and most capable character in Bikini Bottom, a scientist and a fighter who is genuinely good at nearly everything she tries, and she knows it. Her confidence can tip into showing off, into a need to prove that she and her home on dry land are better than the soft sea creatures around her. Pride is the least villainous of her possible sins, because Sandy mostly earns her high opinion of herself. But the theory notes that even earned pride is still pride, a quiet certainty of being above the others. The two smallest characters carry two of the heaviest ideas. Gary the snail is gluttony, the simple animal hunger for more food, more comfort, more of whatever is in front of him, fitting for a pet whose whole life revolves around being fed. Plankton is envy, and his envy is the saddest of the set. Everything he does is shaped by his desire for what Mr. Krabs has. His rivalry with Mr. Krabs and his endless obsession with the Krabby Patty formula point naturally toward envy. The earlier reveal of their broken friendship deepens this. Plankton does not only want success, he wants the success he believes was stolen from him, the half of a life that walked out the door with his oldest friend, and that longing has curdled into a lifetime of scheming. SpongeBob is the strangest fit of all, and his sin needs the most explanation. The theory assigns him lust, which sounds wrong for the most wholesome character on television, until the word is understood properly. The match relies on an older meaning of lust, closer to enthusiasm and eagerness, a powerful appetite for experience, rather than anything improper. By that definition, SpongeBob fits perfectly, since his unbridled enthusiasm pours into every part of his life, his work, his friends, his home, and his pets, and he greets each day with an eagerness that never seems to run out. His sin, if it is one at all, is wanting everything too much, loving the world too hard. Among 7 creatures built around human weakness, SpongeBob's flaw is the only one that looks like a virtue, a hunger not for money or comfort or revenge, but simply for life itself. Here is where honesty has to enter, because the people who actually made the show have given a careful and complicated answer about all of this. In the same cast reunion where the nuclear theory was confirmed, the 7 sins idea came up too, and the response was far more cautious. Roger Bumpus, the voice of Squidward, noted that he could see the resemblance between Patrick and Mr. Krabs and their assigned sins, but not for the rest of the cast. The writer, Mr. Lawrence, went further and gently pushed back on the whole framework. He compared the cast to the 7 deadly sins and to the castaways of Gilligan's Island, where each character represents a single kind of thing, but he suggested it was not as concrete or as tangible as saying one character is lust and another is something else. His comments, and those of the other cast members, suggest the strict sin mapping was not consciously planned when the series was written. The reason for that hesitation becomes obvious once the matches are pressed even a little. The mappings overlap and refuse to stay clean. Plankton is called envy, but his constant scheming and his belief in his own genius look just as much like pride, and his attacks on Mr. Krabs carry plenty of wrath. Squidward is called wrath, yet his bitterness towards SpongeBob's easy happiness is also a kind of envy, a resentment of a joy he cannot reach. The single trait labels work as a fun first glance and then begin to blur, endure because real characters, even cartoon ones, are made of more than one weakness. So the truth sits in an interesting middle place. The show was almost certainly not written as a deliberate puzzle where each character secretly equals a named sin, and yet the pattern is real enough that even the cast can see parts of it. What makes the theory endure, despite its makers waving it off, is that it touches something true about how the show was built. Each character was given one giant, exaggerated trait so that audiences could recognize them instantly, the same trick that morality plays and old fables have always used. When a character is reduced to a single overwhelming hunger or anger or laziness, that single trait will naturally resemble one of the classic vices, because the vices were themselves invented to name the most common ways a single trait can swallow a person whole. The 7 sins were never a secret code hidden in the scripts. They are simply the oldest map of human weakness, and a show that built its cast out of exaggerated weakness was always going to land near them. The quietly unsettling part is what the map reveals about the one exception. In a town shaped by greed and envy and wrath and sloth, the brightest creature, the one everyone loves, carries the only sin that points outward instead of inward, a bottomless love of the world that looks less like a flaw and more like the single thing keeping the whole poisoned paradise from going dark. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The 7 sins theory turns the beloved cast into a quiet gallery of human weakness, even if their creators never planned it that way. The next mystery is not about who the characters are, but about when they exist, and the answer refuses to make sense. Because the timeline of Bikini Bottom contradicts itself again and again, and the more closely it is examined, the less the town seems to obey time at all. Section 8. The timeline that never adds up. Time in Bikini Bottom does not behave the way time behaves anywhere else. At first, this is easy to miss, because the show moves from one small story to the next without ever asking the audience to keep track of how the pieces fit together. But the longer the series runs, and the more carefully its history is examined, the stranger the picture becomes. Origins change. Ages refuse to settle. A student attends the same school for decades and never graduates. Characters who should grow old stay exactly as they were, year after year, while the world around them quietly piles up contradictions. Taken one at a time, each of these is a small slip, the kind any long show might make. Taken together, they begin to suggest something eerier, that the town beneath the lagoon does not obey time at all. The clearest place this shows is in the simple question of how old SpongeBob is, a question the show has spent its entire run avoiding. There is a real disparity between SpongeBob's lifestyle and his personality, since he is old enough to live on his own and hold a full-time job, yet he behaves with the immaturity of a child. The show once tried to pin a number to him. A birth date appeared on his driver's license in the early seasons, but the numbers did not quite line up with the rest of the world he lived in, and the birth date was quietly removed from later appearances of the license and other documents, which let the series settle into a floating timeline where characters never age. There is a darker reason that change may have been made, hiding behind the cartoon logic. If the early birth date were taken seriously, the math would have made SpongeBob far younger than his job should allow, which would have placed Mr. Krabs in the position of employing a child for profit. Rather than wrestle with that uncomfortable detail, the show simply erased the number and let the question dissolve. That phrase, a floating timeline, is the polite way of describing a world where the clock has simply been switched off. SpongeBob is treated as a working adult who pays for his own pineapple home, and in the movie he is told repeatedly that he is just a kid. Both of these are true at once, and the show has decided never to choose between them. The single best example of the frozen clock is the running gag that has followed SpongeBob since the very first season, his endless and doomed attempt to earn his boating license. Earning that license is described as SpongeBob's biggest goal in life, and yet he has never given it permanently, which keeps him forever enrolled at Mrs. Puff's boating school. He is not a new student struggling through a single semester. He has spent years at the school, trying and failing again and again, and on the rare occasions he has gotten the license, he loses it almost immediately. The specific ways he loses it are worth walking through, because each one is its own small absurdity. In the second season episode, No Free Rides, Mrs. Puff is so desperate to be free of him that she hands him a passing grade he did not earn, simply to never teach him again. His parents are so proud that they buy him a brand new boatmobile, and the guilt of granting a license to to such a dangerous driver, eats at Mrs. Puff until she tries to take the boat back herself, leading to a crash that undoes everything. In another episode, Bumper to Bumper, SpongeBob actually passes and gets his license, only for it to be declared null and void on a technicality, because it turns out Mrs. Puff had violated the terms of her own house arrest. Later still, the show built an entire episode, Tudor Sauce, around the plain admission that SpongeBob has been in boating school his whole life and has never passed his test, sending Mr. Krabs in to try teaching him instead, with results that repeatedly destroy the Krusty Krab. A person cannot attend the same driving school for a lifetime in a world where time moves normally. In Bikini Bottom, he can, and he does, forever. Among fans, there is a popular explanation for why the license is never truly earned, and it is worth sharing while being honest that it is an interpretation rather than a confirmed fact. The idea holds that SpongeBob can never get his license because the moment he does, he would officially become a full adult, and the show needs him to remain a perpetual kid. By this reading, the failed test is not a gag about bad driving. It is the lock that keeps SpongeBob frozen in a childlike state no matter how many years pass. Whether the people who made the show ever stated this as a firm rule is not something that can be cleanly proven, so it belongs in the realm of fan reasoning, but it captures the feeling perfectly. SpongeBob is held in place, never allowed to cross the line that would let him grow up, the same way the whole town is held outside the normal flow of time. That same license points at another quiet problem, which is that the town's own paperwork does not agree with itself. Mr. Krabs alone has been shown holding 3 different driver's licenses across the series, each one carrying a different home address and a different picture, including versions where he has facial hair and versions where he does not. The documents that are supposed to record who a character is keep changing the answer. The background residents fare no better, with at least one character whose license claims he has no hair despite his picture clearly showing hair, and Patrick, who has no hair at all, somehow carrying a license that lists his hair as pink. These are tiny details that almost no one notices on a single viewing. Gathered together, they paint a picture of a place where even the official records cannot keep a person's basic facts straight from one episode to the next, as if the town's memory of itself resets every time the story needs it to. The contradictions are not limited to age or paperwork. They reach all the way back into the show's own history, into the origins of the things it treats as most important. Earlier in this story, the reveal from Friend or Foe explained that the Krabby Patty was an accident, created by 2 boyhood friends during a single fight, with the recipe torn in half and the formula born from spilled ingredients. That story is detailed and specific. Yet in a different episode, Enemy In-Law, Mr. Krabs states that the secret formula is an old Krabs family recipe, passed down rather than invented by accident. Both versions are presented as the truth, and they cannot both be true. The single most important object in the entire series, the formula the whole show revolves around, has 2 completely different origins, and the show has never reconciled them. The same episode that gave the Krabby Patty its accidental birth contains a smaller impossibility that points at the same problem. In the childhood flashback, Old Man Jenkins appears as an old man, even though the flashback takes place when Mr. Krabs and Plankton were children, which would make Jenkins impossibly ancient. A character who is old in the present is also old in a memory from generations earlier, as if he has been elderly for the entire history of the town. The flashback hides another quiet impossibility too, since Plankton speaks with the exact same adult voice as a small child that he uses as a grown creature, as though he was simply born middle-aged. These are tiny details, easy to laugh off, and yet they fit the larger pattern exactly. Aging in Bikini Bottom does not run in one direction. People are whatever age the story needs them to be, whenever the story needs it. The deepest version of this problem does not involve a single object or a single character, but the very friendships at the heart of the show, and it was created by the show's own newer projects. For its first 2 decades, the origin of these friendships was settled. In the first season episode Tea at the Tree Dome, which aired on the 1st of May in 1999, SpongeBob meets Sandy Cheeks for the very first time as a stranger, an adult squirrel from the surface who lives inside an air-filled glass dome, and he nearly dries out in her home because he has never encountered air before. She introduces herself, they bond over their shared love of martial arts, and she invites him in for tea, and for many years that was the official story of how the 2 of them met. It is a meeting between 2 grown strangers who had never crossed paths before. Then the universe of the show expanded, and the expansion quietly rewrote that history. A prequel series called Camp Coral followed a 10-year-old SpongeBob at a summer sleepaway camp, and it placed Sandy right there beside him as a child, contradicting the events of Tea at the Tree Dome, where the two clearly met as adults who did not know each other. The feature film Sponge on the Run did the same thing, using a flashback in which Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs all recall having met SpongeBob back at Camp Coral when most of them were children, quietly retconning the early episodes that had introduced SpongeBob to both Mr. Krabs and Sandy as a newcomer. Suddenly, the friends who supposedly met as adults had known each other since childhood, and two completely separate origin stories existed for the same relationships, each treated as true within its own corner of the franchise. The show was aware enough of the problem to attempt a patch, and the patch only deepened the strangeness. An episode of the prequel offered an explanation, claiming that an adult Sandy had sent her own younger self back to Camp Coral in order to stop Plankton from ever getting the Krabby Patty formula. The fix borrows the same time travel logic that once trapped Squidward in a loop, bending the timeline to make two impossible facts coexist. But the repair leaves a hole exactly where it tries to seal one. Even with the time travel explanation, nothing accounts for why SpongeBob and Sandy did not recognize each other at all in Tea at the Tree Dome, greeting one another as total strangers, despite supposedly having been childhood camp friends. The attempt to make the timeline consistent created a new contradiction inside the solution itself. The origin of the show's central friendships now exists in two versions that cannot be reconciled, with a time travel bandage that solves one wound by opening another. What makes all of this more interesting than a simple list of mistakes is that the people behind the show are fully aware of it and have openly admitted it. Continuity has never been a priority for the team behind SpongeBob SquarePants, and the world of Bikini Bottom is as inconsistent as the show itself. The official SpongeBob channel even released a video built entirely around this idea. It is titled around the contradictions, inconsistencies, and continuity errors viewers never noticed, and it openly states that the show is filled with inconsistencies and contradictions before asking what the truth actually is. The same video points to the kind of broken logic that fills the world, like a single background fish taking on many different identities across episodes, or glasses of water somehow existing underwater. The show is not hiding its contradictions. It is celebrating them, treating the broken rules of its world as part of the fun, rather than as errors to be fixed. That world breaks more than just time. Fire burns underwater. Characters drink water while surrounded by water. Background fish appear as a dozen different people with a dozen different jobs and names. None of it makes physical sense, and none of it is meant to. The town runs on cartoon logic, where the only rule is that there are no rules, and where the writers reserve the right to contradict anything they established before. There is also the simple, staggering fact of how long it has all gone on. The series began in 1999 and has continued for more than 25 years, and across that entire span, not one of its characters has aged a single day. SpongeBob has been named Employee of the Month more times than a normal working life could contain. The Krusty Krab has celebrated anniversaries that stack up far beyond any sensible number of years. For most of the show's life, this is simply funny, but laid alongside the other strange truths uncovered in this video, it starts to feel like something more than comedy. A place where time does not pass, where origins rewrite themselves, where a person can be old in two eras at once, and a student can study forever without ever finishing, begins to resemble a place that exists outside the normal world entirely. The honest explanation has to be stated plainly, because the simplest answer is usually the right one. SpongeBob SquarePants is a comedy that has run for more than 25 years, made by many different writers across many different eras, and at no point did it ever try to keep a careful record of its own history. The contradictions are the natural result of a show that values the joke in front of it over the timeline behind it, and the makers themselves have said as much. The newer retcons, the rewritten friendships, and the shifting documents are the ordinary cost of a franchise that keeps growing across prequels and films made decades apart, each adding to the world without checking every earlier claim. There is no hidden document proving that Bikini Bottom is frozen in time on purpose. The clock was never switched off by design. It was simply never wound in the first place. And yet the feeling refuses to leave once it has arrived. Read on its own, the floating timeline is a writing choice. Read alongside the time loop that traps Squidward 2,000 years from home, and alongside the theory that the whole town was born from a blast that poisoned a real island for thousands of years, the floating timeline takes on a colder shape. It begins to look less like a town that forgot to age, and more like a town that cannot. A place suspended. A bright, busy, endlessly cheerful world where no one ever grows up, no one ever finishes, no one ever moves forward, and the same sunny day repeats itself across the decades without end. The contradictions may only be the fingerprints of a careless comedy, but they leave behind the quiet impression of a town stuck somewhere just outside of time, smiling, working, and never once getting any older. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The broken timeline leaves the unsettling sense of a town suspended outside of time, never aging and never moving forward. The next mystery goes deeper into the dark places the comedy keeps just out of sight, because beneath the bright colors, Bikini Bottom hides genuine horror in its quietest corners, and not all of it can be explained away as a joke. Section 9. The Quiet Horror of Bikini Bottom. The man who created SpongeBob SquarePants was a marine biologist before he was an animator. Steven Hillenburg studied the ocean, taught it to others, and understood it in a way most cartoonists never could. That background gave the show its warmth and its strange accuracy. The jellyfish and the anemones and the coral, all rendered by someone who loved them. It also gave the show something darker, because anyone who truly knows the ocean knows that most of it is not bright and warm at all. The deep sea is the largest dark place on Earth. It is cold, crushing, and lightless, filled with creatures that glow faintly in water no sunlight ever reaches. The bright comfort of Bikini Bottom sits at the top of that darkness, and every so often the show takes its audience down into it. The result is some of the quietest and most genuine horror ever slipped into a children's cartoon. The deepest descent the show ever made came early, in a first season episode called Rock Bottom. The setup could not be more ordinary. SpongeBob and Patrick spend a happy day at Glove World, a glove-themed amusement park they love, and afterward they board a bus to go home. The mistake is small and instantly recognizable to anyone who has ever traveled alone in an unfamiliar place. They get on the wrong bus. The vehicle carries them to the edge of a cliff and then plunges straight down it, dragging them far below the world they know. The cliff leads to a sort of aphotic zone called Rock Bottom, a deep sea trench inhabited by strange creatures, and Patrick manages to get on a bus home while accidentally leaving SpongeBob behind. In an instant, the cheerful little sponge is stranded alone at the bottom of the ocean, in a place that does not work the way home works, with no clear way back. What follows is built almost entirely out of unease. Rock Bottom is a town of perpetual darkness, lit only by the faint glow of its own residents, who are based on real deep-sea animals and look genuinely alien. The setting features dim lighting and visibility limited to faint bioluminescence, with rugged structures, steep drop-offs, and confusing, sometimes inverted signage that disorients any outsider, while the residents communicate in a thick, incomprehensible dialect rendered as blown raspberries that the characters from Bikini Bottom cannot understand. SpongeBob cannot read the signs. He cannot speak to the locals. He cannot tell up from down. Every attempt he makes to catch a bus home fails in a slightly surreal way, the bus pulling away the instant he turns his back, again and again, until the comedy of it curdles into something closer to a nightmare about being trapped. The episode reaches its darkest point in the bus station. SpongeBob learns that the last bus has already left for the night, and that he is stuck until morning, and as the station attendant leaves, the lights are shut off, plunging him into blackness. He reaches for his small glove flashlight, and the battery dies, leaving him with nothing. Standing alone in the dark, he mutters that this is not normal everyday darkness, that this is advanced darkness. Then hears the familiar raspberry sound echoing toward him, and bolts in terror back toward the cliff. For a few seconds, the show is pure dread, a small, frightened creature, alone, in the deep dark, far from home, with something unseen drawing closer. There is no laugh track to cushion it. The fear is allowed to be real. The release, when it comes, is gentle, and the gentleness is part of why the episode lands so hard. The source of the raspberry sound turns out to be a friendly anglerfish creature who has found SpongeBob's lost balloon, which he blows up and ties to SpongeBob's wrist so the sponge can float back up the cliff to Bikini Bottom. The monster in the dark was kindness all along. Even so, the relief does not erase what came before it. The episode trusted its young audience audience to sit inside genuine fear for several minutes, to feel lost and small and alone before offering any comfort. That trust is rare in children's television, and it is why so many people who grew up with the show remember Rock Bottom with a small shiver decades later. The fear works because it is real, not invented. The premise came from an actual childhood experience of the writer Mr. Lawrence, who once got on the wrong bus on his way home from school, and the episode is widely regarded as one of the best and darkest in the entire series, praised for its dim, oppressive atmosphere, its eerie residents, and the chilling quality of the voice acting. The horror of Rock Bottom is not a ghost or a monster. It is the ordinary, universal terror of being somewhere unfamiliar, after dark, unable to make anyone understand, with no certain way home. The show reached past invented scares and touched a fear almost everyone has felt, and then set it at the bottom of the sea where the light cannot reach. Some critics have even read a quieter layer beneath it, a hint of the anxiety and disorientation of feeling lost in a far larger sense, of hitting a personal rock bottom, though the show is careful never to say so directly. Rock Bottom is the clearest example, but it is not the only place the show lets the dark show through. The vampire from the Krusty Krab, the gaunt figure flicking the lights in the night, was never explained and never left, returning again and again across later episodes as a genuine supernatural resident of the world, an unsettling presence the show simply accepts. The same haunted night gave the sky outside that restaurant a sickly green color it never had before, a small visual wrongness that lingered in the background while the comedy played out in front. Across its run, the series keeps a thin current of real dread running underneath the jokes, surfacing in deep trenches and dark kitchens and quiet, wrong moments, then ducking back down before it can frighten too much. The horror is always restrained, always brief, always wrapped in comedy, but it is real and it is there on purpose. A word of caution belongs here, because this is exactly the territory where truth and fiction get tangled. Over the years, the show's eerie reputation has inspired a flood of fan-made horror stories online, frightening tales presented as secret, lost episodes, complete with invented descriptions of disturbing footage that supposedly never aired. These stories spread widely, and many people have encountered them and wondered whether they could be real. They are not. They are fan fiction, written by anonymous internet users, never produced by the show, never broadcast, and not part of the canon in any way. Out of care for anyone who might go looking, the disturbing details of those stories are not worth repeating here, and the only important point is the line between them and the genuine article. The real horror of Bikini Bottom is nothing like the gory inventions of internet myths. The real horror is restrained and human and almost tender, a frightened sponge in a dark bus station, and that restraint is precisely what the fan stories lack. The difference matters because it reveals what the show was actually doing. A lesser series, if it wanted to scare children, would reach for blood and monsters and shock. SpongeBob reached instead for the small, deep fears that everyone carries and rarely names. The fear of being lost, the fear of the dark, the fear of being somewhere the rules no longer work, surrounded by people who cannot understand a single word you say, the fear of looking up and realizing the last way home has already gone. These are quiet horrors, the kind that do not need gore because they live in everyone already, and the show summoned them with a wrong bus and a dead flashlight rather than with anything graphic. That is the true unease at the bottom of the lagoon. Underneath the color and the laughter, the show always remembered what it was set in, the vast, dark ocean where most of life happens, far from any light. It let that darkness rise up now and then, just enough to be felt, in a trench town that runs on confusion and dread, in a vampire that will not stop haunting a restaurant, in a green sky that should not be green. Then it pulled the brightness back over everything and carried on as if nothing had happened. The genius of it is the restraint. The show could frighten without scarring, could touch real fear, and then float a balloon down to lift its hero safely home. The quiet horror of Bikini Bottom was never about monsters. It was about how thin the bright surface really is, and how much dark water waits just beneath it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show always remembered the dark ocean it was set in, letting real and gentle fear rise up before pulling the brightness back over everything. All of these threads, the twists and the theories and the dread, finally lead to one last question. Because once the bomb, the sins, the broken clock, and the dark darkness are placed side by side, a single strange picture of what SpongeBob really is begins to take shape. Section 10. What the sponge is. After everything, after the loops and the lies and the bombs and the bright surface, one question is left standing, and it is the simplest one of all. What is this show really? What is the sponge? For more than 25 years, SpongeBob SquarePants has been treated as the safest thing on television, a burst of color and laughter handed to children as pure comfort, asked to mean nothing more than a good time. Yet every thread pulled in this video has led somewhere stranger than comfort. A town built on a real catastrophe, a cast shaped like human weakness, a clock that does not run, a dark ocean pressing up against the brightness from below. None of these were invented to spoil the fun. They were already there, sitting quietly inside the show the whole time, waiting for anyone willing to look. Laid side by side, they begin to form a single picture, and that picture answers the question in a way that is both unsettling and, in the end, oddly beautiful. The first thing the show ever taught about itself, back on the final day of the 20th century, was that its world does not obey the ordinary rules. SB-129 took the grumpiest, most grounded character in Bikini Bottom and dropped him through time, freezing Squidward in a restaurant cooler and thawing him 2,000 years later in a cold, chrome future, ruled by a robot wearing SpongeBob's face. It sent him further back than the town itself existed, to a primitive sea where he taught two ape-like creatures the game of jellyfishing, simply to be left alone. And then it stranded him in a white void, where a voice repeated the word alone, until he broke down and admitted he missed the very neighbor he had spent the whole day fleeing. The ending revealed that Squidward invented jellyfishing by trying to escape it, a loop with no beginning and no end, a circle in time that the show built on purpose and wired its music to echo. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, has called it the most surreal episode the series ever made. It is also a quiet thesis statement. From its earliest months, the show announced that Bikini Bottom is a place where time can fold, where reality can crack open into an empty room, and where a small, grouchy decision can ripple across thousands of years. The second lesson was about the thing the whole series revolves around, and it turned out to be an accident. Friend or Foe, the premiere of the 5th season in 2007, finally explained why a tiny green creature and a red crab have spent a lifetime at war over a single recipe. The answer was a lost friendship. Eugene Krabs and Sheldon Plankton were once two bullied boys who stuck together and dreamed of building a meal the whole town would love. The first customer brave enough to try their creation collapsed after a single bite. The local paper announced that their so-called plab patty had knocked out Old Man Jenkins, and the two friends turned on each other instantly, tearing their recipe in half. Plankton was left holding the bottom scrap, which carried only the final line, a pinch of chum, which is the entire reason the chum bucket exists and serves the one food nobody wants. While they fought, a shelf tipped over and spilled a jumble of ingredients into the batter, and that unplanned mixture was the true Krabby Patty. The most fought-over object in the entire series was never invented by anyone. It fell from a shelf during the death of a friendship, and because only Karen, Plankton's computer wife, could give the honest version after recording it as a security camera, the episode quietly admitted that neither the hero nor the villain can be trusted to tell the story of their own lives. The third lesson was about fear, and it showed that the scariest thing in Bikini Bottom is usually a story people tell themselves. Graveyard Shift, from the 2nd season, began with greed, as Mr. Krabs decided to keep the Krusty Krab open through the night to squeeze out a few extra coins. Trapped in the empty restaurant at 3 in the morning, Squidward invented the legend of the hash-slinging slasher to torment SpongeBob, complete with 3 warning signs, and then watched in growing terror as every sign came true on its own. The lights flickered, the phone rang with no one there, and a bus arrived that should not have been running. The tall figure that stepped off it, with its humpback and red eyes and spatula hand, turned out to be a nervous teenager looking for a job application. Every frightening detail explained by something dull and human. And then the show added one more reveal it refused to explain, showing that the flickering lights had been caused all along by Nosferatu, the silent film vampire, standing at the switch for no reason at all. The episode aired on the 6th of September, which happens to be the birthday of Max Schreck, the actor who first played that vampire in 1922, a coincidence striking enough to be worth naming. In the middle of his terror, Squidward confessed that he had always sort of liked SpongeBob, the same same buried affection that surfaced in the empty void of SB-129. Proof that this character only tells the truth when he believes he is about to lose everything. The fourth lesson reversed the third, and it carried a detail that turned out to be the hinge of this entire video. Dying for Pi, also from the second season, took a harmless-looking gift and let it be exactly as dangerous as it seemed. Squidward, too lazy to make a real present for Employee Brotherhood Day, bought a pie from a crew of pirates who let slip that it was actually a bomb, then took the warning back the moment they smelled his money and sold it to him for $25. A single crumb of it blew out the wall of the office. Believing SpongeBob had eaten the rest, Squidward spent the day giving him a perfect final goodbye, only to learn at the end that SpongeBob had kept the pie in his pocket the whole time, saving it to share. He tripped, the bomb flew into Squidward's face, and the explosion leveled the entire town, while Squidward could only manage a small, flat ow. That explosion is the hinge, because the show did not draw it. It used real footage of an actual nuclear weapons test, the Baker shot from Operation Crossroads, a detonation the United States carried out at Bikini Atoll. A children's cartoon reached for genuine atomic test footage from the very island its town is named after and dropped it into the middle of an episode about a pie. The fifth and final twist lifted the whole world up out of the water. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, released in 2004 and made by series creator Steven Hillenburg as an intended ending, sent SpongeBob and Patrick on a journey to recover King Neptune's stolen crown and save Mr. Krabs from execution after Plankton framed him as part of a plan to enslave the entire ocean. The journey climbed all the way to the surface and revealed a real human world resting on top of Bikini Bottom. The dreaded faraway place called Shell City turned out to be a gift shop on a beach, selling dried out dead sea creatures as souvenirs, and the monstrous Cyclops the sea feared was simply a human diver in a hard hat. A real human lifeguard, David Hasselhoff, carried the two heroes across a real ocean on his back. The choice to film the surface in live action rather than animation made the point unmistakable. Within the logic of the movie, the world above is the real world, and the cartoon lives at the bottom of it, beneath people who walk the beach, sell its dead as decoration, and never once look down. Those 5 reveals are what the show openly admitted. The theories are what it may have buried, and the first of them gives the whole picture its dark foundation. The nuclear origin theory begins with a fact that cannot be argued away. The town is named after Bikini Atoll, a real ring of islands in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. After the Second World War, the United States was given control of that part of the Pacific, and between 1946 and 1958, it detonated 67 nuclear weapons on these islands. The first program, in 1946, was called Operation Crossroads, the same test whose footage closes Dying for Pi. To make room for the blasts, the government removed 167 Bikinians and relocated them to other islands, where they suffered starvation from inadequate food. The largest of the tests, known as Bravo, was detonated on the 1st of March in 1954 and created an explosion equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. The damage never faded. The displaced Bikini people became exiles who cannot return to their ancestral homelands because of radiation that will not dissipate for thousands of years. The lonely island floating above the town in the opening of nearly every episode is that atoll, and the theory holds that the talking, working sea creatures below are mutations caused by the radiation that poisoned it. For years, that idea lived only in fan discussions, until the people who made the show were asked about it directly. In late 2024, during a cast reunion organized by Esquire, Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton and has written many episodes, confirmed the fan theory that Bikini Bottom was the result of nuclear testing, explaining that the show was built to represent the theoretical results of the real atomic testing at Bikini Atoll, and even claiming the show takes place after a post-apocalyptic war. Honesty requires holding that confirmation carefully, because the situation is not clean. The post-apocalyptic version does not line up with the show itself, which depicts a living human society in various forms across the series and the movies. There is also an earlier and more cautious official answer on record. A Nickelodeon representative seemingly dismissed the theory in an email statement, writing simply that the show is set in Bikini Bottom, so the truth sits in between. The connection to the real atoll is undeniable and stamped on the front of the show. The full mutation story is something one writer enthusiastically confirmed, confirmed, the network once brushed aside, and the show's own footage partly contradicts. It is real inspiration, real fun for the makers, and a real ambiguity they seem happy to leave open. The second theory turns from the place to the characters, and it claims that each member of the main cast quietly carries one of the 7 deadly sins, the old framework of human weakness drawn from passages in Proverbs and Galatians. In the common version, SpongeBob is lust, Patrick is sloth, Squidward is wrath, Sandy is pride, Mr. Krabs is greed, Plankton is envy, and Gary the Snail is gluttony. The matches are easy to find. Mr. Krabs talks about his customers as money walking out the door and values profit over the safety and happiness of those around him, making him a clear picture of greed. Plankton's whole life is shaped by envy of the friend whose success he believes was stolen from him. SpongeBob's sin is the strangest because the word lust here means an older sense, closer to eagerness, an unbridled enthusiasm that pours into every part of his life, work and friends and home and pets, a bottomless appetite for living rather than anything improper. Here too, honesty matters because the makers pushed back. Roger Bumpus could see the resemblance for Patrick and Mr. Krabs, but not the others, and Mr. Lawrence compared the cast to the 7 sins and to Gilligan's Island, while suggesting it was never as concrete as assigning one fixed sin to each character. The labels blur on contact, since Plankton's envy is also pride and wrath, and Squidward's wrath is also envy. The pattern is real because the show built each character around one giant exaggerated trait, and exaggerated single traits naturally resemble the vices that were invented to name them, not because anyone hid a secret code in the scripts. The third theory concerns time, and it leaves the strongest impression of a world that has come loose from the ordinary rules. The age of SpongeBob has never been fixed. A birth date once appeared on his license, but the numbers did not match the world around him, so it was quietly removed, letting the series settle into a floating timeline where characters never age, even though SpongeBob lives alone and holds a full-time job while behaving like a child. The clearest symbol of that frozen clock is his boating license. Earning it is described as his biggest goal in life, yet he has never given it permanently, keeping him forever enrolled at Mrs. Puff's boating school. He has spent years there, getting the license a few times, only to lose it almost immediately, once handed it by an exhausted teacher just to be rid of him. The origins of things contradict themselves, too. The Krabby Patty was an accident in Friend or Foe, yet in the episode Enemy In-Law, Krabs calls the formula an old Krabs family recipe, and Old Man Jenkins appears as an old man in a flashback to a time when Krabs and Plankton were children. The show does not hide any of this. The official SpongeBob channel released a video built around its own contradictions and continuity errors, openly stating that the show is filled with inconsistencies, pointing to background fish who take on many identities and glasses of water that exist underwater. Continuity has never been a priority for the team behind the show. The simplest explanation is a long comedy that never kept a clock. The eerier impression, laid beside the bomb that may have made the town, is of a place suspended outside time, where no one ages, no one finishes, and the same sunny day repeats across the decades. The fourth theory is the darkness the comedy keeps just out of sight, and it is rooted in the fact that the show's creator was a marine biologist who knew the ocean is mostly a cold, lightless place. The clearest descent into it came in the first season, in Rock Bottom. SpongeBob and Patrick board the wrong bus home from Glove World and are carried down a cliff into a deep-sea trench, where Patrick accidentally leaves SpongeBob stranded among strange creatures. The town is a place of perpetual darkness, lit only by faint bioluminescence, with confusing inverted signage, and residents who speak in an incomprehensible dialect of blown raspberries, creating an atmosphere of isolation and unease. When the last bus leaves and the station lights are shut off, SpongeBob's flashlight dies, and alone in what he calls advanced darkness, he hears a raspberry sound approaching and runs in terror, only for it to be a friendly anglerfish returning his lost balloon. The episode came from a real childhood experience of the writer Mr. Lawrence, who once got on the wrong bus home, and it is widely regarded as one of the darkest and best in the series. The horror was never gore. It was the universal fear of being lost somewhere wrong, after dark, unable to make anyone understand. That same restrained dread runs through the vampire who keeps returning to the Krusty Krab, and the sickly green sky that appeared over it. And it is the opposite of the graphic fan-made horror story stories that circulate online, which are entirely fan fiction, never aired, and not part of the show in any way. Set all of these beside one another, and the separate pieces stop looking separate. The real nuclear test footage in Dying for Pi, the real atoll the town is named for, and a writer's confirmation that the radiation theory was always part of the fun point toward a town that may have been born from one of the darkest events of the last century. The frozen timeline, where no one ages and the same day repeats forever, fits a place that was never supposed to hold life at all. The cast built from human weakness fills that place with greed and envy and wrath and sloth and pride. The dark trench and the haunting vampire and the green sky remind the audience that the bright surface is thin and that cold water waits beneath it. And the surface world from the movie, the indifferent humans who walk the beach above and sell the dead below as souvenirs, echoes the same indifference that once turned a real home into a test site while people watched from ships. The pieces were never meant to be assembled. Assembled anyway, they describe a paradise sitting on top of a wound. That is where the answer to the question finally arrives, and it runs through one character. If Bikini Bottom is a poisoned place, frozen outside time, populated by living weaknesses and shadowed by real dread, then the strangest thing in it is SpongeBob himself. Among a cast whose flaws point inward toward money and anger and laziness and pride, his single trait points outward. His sin, if it is one, is loving the world too much, greeting every day with an eagerness that never runs dry. He is the perpetual student who never graduates, the kid the show refuses to let grow up, held in place by a license he will never earn, and that refusal keeps him eternally open, eternally delighted, eternally ready. In a town that may have come from a bomb, where time does not move and the dark presses up from below, SpongeBob is the one force holding the lights on. His happiness is not naive. It is a choice he makes again and again in a place that gives him every reason not to. Watched this way, the most optimistic show ever made for children becomes a portrait of joy chosen on top of catastrophe, of brightness kept burning in a place that was supposed to be lifeless, of a small creature who decides every single morning to be glad to exist in a world that has no good reason to contain him. The honest answer has to hold two truths at once, and refusing either one would be a lie. SpongeBob SquarePants is, on its surface, exactly what it appears to be, a warm and silly comedy made by people who love the ocean and wanted to make children laugh. A show so uninterested in its own continuity that it broadcast a video celebrating its mistakes. There is no hidden master plan stitching every theory into a single secret. And yet, in the imaginations of the very people who made it and the millions who grew up on it, the show became something larger and sadder and stranger. A place where a real atoll and a real bomb and a real dark ocean seeped quietly into the foundation, and where a cheerful sponge carries the whole weight of human weakness on the strength of his own joy. Both readings are true. The comedy is real, and the depth underneath it is real. And the show is great precisely because it never forced anyone to choose between them. A child can watch it as pure delight. An adult can watch the same frames and feel the cold water underneath. The brightness was never a lie covering the darkness. The brightness was the response to it. That may be the real reason the show has lasted, and the real gift it gave the generation raised on it. Children who grew up with SpongeBob absorbed something they could not yet name, a quiet instruction about how to live in a world that does not always reward enthusiasm or kindness. They learned it from a sponge who kept flipping patties and loving his friends and greeting the morning with open arms, no matter how many times the universe knocked his town flat or sent him down the wrong bus into the dark. Beneath the loops and the bombs and the broken clock, the show was teaching resilience, the only way a cartoon can, by example, through a character who simply refused to stop being glad. The theories make the world darker. SpongeBob makes the darkness survivable. And the answer to what the sponge really is may be the simplest and the hardest thing of all. He is what it looks like to choose joy in a place built on ruin, every day, forever, and to mean it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.